Okay. Time to study. So we're gonna cover chapters 3 through 6 tonight. And we have an hour and 15 minutes to do so. And I do hope we get through the whole thing, but we'll see how it goes. I actually think what BJ said, it being a small crew, it probably will make it easier to move through the material. So would anybody like to start reading?
I will.
Great.
Sensation and consciousness. God is consciousness. Consciousness is static. Consciousness is the knowing of mind. Knowing is static. Consciousness is the spiritual awareness of being, of all knowing, all power, and all presence. Thinking is electric. God's thinking is expressed by two-way moving wave extensions from consciousness, like a lever swinging upon a fixed fulcrum, or like waves extending from the calm sea. Thought expression is dynamic. Thinking belongs to the electrically sensed and conditioned vibrating universe of motion. Thinking is the motionless principle in light which creates the illusion of motion. The self of man belongs to the static, invisible, conscious, unconditioned universe of knowing. We express knowing in the dynamic, visible, electrically conditioned universe of sensation. Sensation is the electrical awareness of motion stimulating the spiritual qualities of the one idea by creating imaged quantities of separate forms which seem to have substance. Consciousness is real. Sensation stimulates reality through motion of interchanging lights, but the mirage of a city is not the city it reflects. Confusion and misunderstanding as to whether we are thinking consciously from knowledge or sensing electrically from memory records stored in our brains have led us to the necessity of distinguishing between the two by the common usage of such terms as the human mind and mortal mind. We know full well, while using them, that there is but the one mind of the one living God of love. The universal mind centers every particle and mass in this universe, animal, vegetable, or mineral, electron, atom, or sun. Man is the only unit in creation who has conscious awareness of the spirit within him and electrical awareness of dually conditioned light acting upon his senses. All other units of creation have electrical awareness only. Man alone can be freed from body to think with God, to talk with God, and be inspired by his centering light. All other units of creation are limited in their actions to automatic reflexes from sensed memories built up through ages of sensing and recording such sensing as instinct. Likewise, the same confusion leads us to the adoption of such terms as subconscious mind and superconscious mind. There is but one mind functioning universally within all creating things, and that one mind is not stratified nor divided into the more or less. There are no differing conditions of the one mind, nor are there different kinds of mind.
Great. Yeah, I'm interested in hearing what you all think about the difference between knowing and thinking. Like, I'm curious if, as you read that, if it makes sense, if you can find your own inner purchase on that distinction.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I can too.
Um, the way that that's relevant to me right now is I've been learning homeopathy for the last year and started seeing clients, doing consults with homeopathy like 6 months ago. And there is just a fuck ton of information to know about homeopathy. So much information. I could never know all of it in this lifetime. Like thousands of remedies with like all of these detailed little things to know about them. And so I've been like curious about, I've been like actively asking for and attempting to cultivate my sense of knowing about which remedy is going to help someone, rather than like having to like literally sift through all of the information that's in my head about these remedies to pick the right one. And I've been having some success with that. Although, they're connected. It's like the information that I have informs the knowing being able to arise, but it's a bit of a different experience in the session when it comes through a knowing than when it comes through the thinking.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really great example. Welcome, Jess.
Hi.
Glad you made it.
Me too.
BJ, did you want to share anything about your experience of that? Jess, we're talking about the distinction between knowing and thinking.
Mm.
And I asked the question of like, do you find that makes sense? Do you have purchase on that? Do you have an inner experience of that distinction?
Yeah, we just read the first the first section of chapter 3, sensation and consciousness. Yeah, it absolutely makes sense to me. This is so connected to my work in terms of inquiry. And it feels like the distinction between like the limited sense of mind in terms of like the separate self versus like the vast unified knowing that we're all in touch with, and then like toggling back and forth. Like I would say the work that I do is supporting people to toggle back and forth between those two and allowing the separate sense of self to merge back with the unified knowing. Yeah, and it's so fascinating to take in this Walter Russell's telling and like compare that to so many other mystics and to my own knowing of like the sort of constantly running story of our separate self that tells the seemingly linear past and future of our lives, and how to continue to integrate that into a unified sense of self. Yeah. So it totally makes sense to me. Very cool.
Nice. Yeah, it's helpful to hear your stories on how that lands. This part about the mind, there's only one mind. One thing that comes up for me automatically is, well, what about the distinction between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind? And part of why that's so front in my awareness is because I'm some of you may have read on the thread. I'm listening to Scott Mandelker's talks on the archetypical mind and the architecture of the deep mind. The mind that the sun supplies everyone who's in this solar experience, and all these different dimensions of mind. So there are, I do very much think there are dimensions to mind, but it's all part of the same mind. And so yeah, I'm enjoying the kind of contrast between those two. So I do agree. It does land for me that there's one mind. And when I read the part about the distinctions that, colloquially we make when we talk about the mind, I appreciate what he's saying. And there's certainly some value to me to having the ability to talk about the different portions of the one mind. That seems helpful. So I'm curious how that'll play out as we continue through the material. Let's read the next section, imagination, just about a page. Would someone read that?
I can read. Imagination. God is the imaginer of his one idea. All imagining is God's imagining. All creating forms in this thought universe of God's imagining are built in the image of his imagining, creating in his image. All forms in this creating universe of imagined forms are but electric recordings of God's imaginings. They have no existence. Records of idea are not the idea they record. They have no substance. They are but black and white lights of sun-centered wave fields of space, assembled in vibrating systems to simulate substance in an objective universe which is not, but seems to be. God's imagining never began and will never end. It was not created at some remote past time by some vast cosmic event, as commonly believed, nor is it condemned to a heat death by expansion into nothingness. This is a creating universe, not a created one. God did not begin to imagine at some fixed time, for time does not exist. This light wave universe, which records God's knowing by his thinking and imagining, is as eternal as God's thinking is eternal.
Any thoughts on that?
Were you about to say something, Natalie? Yeah, something that I find to be really profound in my own direct experience is finding the presence that I am beyond thought. And then as I've been supported to find from my own teachers and I help people to find this too, is like when I'm in touch with that presence and I look for a beginning, there's no beginning. There's no like time when that presence of awareness that I am began. And I find that's really profound to get in touch with. Yeah. And that's really helpful to me to connect with like what he's talking about. God's imagining never began and will never end. Like it's really helpful to me to be able to actually have a direct experience of the timeless rather than like, wait, what does that mean? There's no time. Like, oh, I can find that when I get still enough to find the presence that I am beyond thinking. So that's something that connects to for me.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a really great, simple explanation of how you access timelessness. That's really neat. Appreciate that. I'm curious what you all think about the difference between, okay, so we talked about the difference between thinking and knowing. What about the difference between imagination and thinking, or imagination and knowing? How does that seem to you?
Steph, are you going to say something? I'm watching you.
I wanted to say something, but I'm not sure if you guys can hear the music in the coffee shop, so I'm hesitant to say stuff. Okay, I'll make it.
A little bit. You also could put your mic like closer to your mouth if you want.
Oh, I don't have a mic with these earphones. It's like in my computer. So maybe if I move my face closer, can you hear me now? Okay, cool.
Yeah. It's not too distracting for me. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I was going to say, in terms of Aaron's question, is I'm thinking about it in terms of archetypes with the elements. So, from an imagination perspective, I usually kind of go up in the clouds and connect the element of air and ether and the heavens. Whereas with knowing, it's more like the earth, the wood element. It's kind of like what I like to play with. And I've been kind of playing around with the I Chings lately. So we've been doing a lot of elemental work, which is exciting. So I just wanted to share that. And the last thing I wanted to say is I started pulling tarot just randomly for different things in my life. Just like, oh, there's an event coming up. Should I go? Should I not go? I'll just pull like a random tarot on my phone because I want to build that trust with the universe. So in a way, it's kind of like my own knowing of like, I should go to this event, but let me just confirm it with the element of air, element of the universe. So that's been a fun little game that I've been playing with recently.
Cool. Thanks. Diana, and then Jess.
I think the difference for me between thinking and imagining would be that thinking is more contained within my small conscious mind and can go round and round in there if I don't get any new inspiration. Thinking feels to me like working with the inputs that I already have. Imagining feels a little bit like using my intuitive faculties to try to incorporate more into my consciousness of like that which is, that which has always been, that which will always be, which is just like an infinity of things, right? So this imagining is still kind of within the realm of thought because it's active and it involves kind of intuiting or receiving or groping around for fun new stuff. But it comes to me differently than thoughts, which feel more mechanical. That's the only way I really know how to say it.
Yeah, thanks. That makes a lot of sense to me. How about you, Jess?
I was going to say that for me, knowing feels like receiving, and imagination feels like more of a creative, the opposite, like a broadcasting, but creative process of like, yeah, an internal creative process.
Mm-hmm.
BJ.
Yeah, I resonate with the creative process too. I think like a way that I'm in touch with it right now that's making sense to me is like the knowing is like the in terms of the way Ross speaks of it is the unmanifest, like the non-separated, you know, like still unified one one essence. And then imagining is like potential. It's like manifest or wait, I think I might have said it backwards. Anyway, maybe I used manifest and unmanifest backwards, but like knowing is one, and imagining is potential. Imagining is like using free will to like create, to yeah, like you were saying, Jess, like what could be instead of what is, which is ultimately one, but what could be, and to seemingly split into form into all the various shapes and colors and everything. Yeah, and I find that our imagining, our seemingly personal imagining, is a part of the creative flow that is God's thinking, God's imagining.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I missed the question. I think I answered a question different than the one that you asked.
Oh, it might
Oh,
have been me.
I got a lot out of your share, Diana. It made a lot of sense to me. I mean, um, I resonated with, like, I could relate to what you were saying. It felt on point. Okay, so let's keep going. Inspiration. I'll read this one. Page 25. Inspiration. Inspiration is the language of light, which man uses to talk with God. Inspiration is that deep awareness of the consciousness of being, which differentiates the genius or mystic from the being of average intelligence. Inspiration in man is accompanied by an intense mental ecstasy, which is characteristic of all who become intensely conscious of their closeness to God. Inspired geniuses forget their bodies while deeply conscious of their existence as holy mind. Their bodies, thus forgotten, act almost automatically in obedience to instinct and cell memory reflexes. Inspired geniuses translate God's knowing into words of man for the soul of man. They uplift all mankind by re-inspiring all who listen to their ecstatic words and rhythms. He who attunes his heart to the messages of genius purifies himself. No impurity can there be in his heart, for verily he then is in communion with the Holy One. One of the words that Ra uses really frequently comes up for me in this whole discussion, or in this whole reading, which is distortion. And it feels like it's relevant to each of the terms, that knowing, thinking, imagination, and inspiration. And in inspiration, it's like, inspiration feels like it's being connected to like undistorted knowledge, or it feels like being connected with truth, or being connected with the source. Whereas like thinking, and probably even imagination, has more to do with like taking apart the one idea, or being in the portions of the one idea, or being interested in the portions of the one idea, which feels like what Ra describes as distortion, which, you know, is just, it just feels like another way of saying being more interested in a portion than being interested in the wholeness, or something like that. And it feels, yeah, it just felt, that's one little comment I wanted to make. Distortion. And knowing specifically is like the realm of like the least distortion, like the, you know, the sort of integrated realm of like the whole idea, the creator's whole idea, or something. What do you all think about inspiration?
One thought I had about it is that it sounds like allowing action to be done. And like, for instance, one, easy, I think, example for a lot of us to think about is like coming home from a long road trip. Like the last, hour, you really know the way home, like, okay, I'm on the road, like, and you just kind of like, there's driving that's happening, but by the time you pull up into your driveway, like you kind of didn't do the last stretch, like it just happened through you. And I don't think that is necessarily inspired, but I do think that is a easy way of like connecting with like, oh yeah, there's action that can just happen through me without me having to do anything about it. And I think inspiration is when that happens and there's like love that's part of it, right? so like if I'm like, for instance, that happens through me a lot when I'm working with clients, like it just starts happening. The words are happening and there's love connected with it. So it's as though I'm driving the last, stretch, and my body or my mind or my something knows what to do. And there's love that's flowing with it. And I take that to be inspiration. Yeah. Diana.
I just love that so much. um, yeah, it's as though you can't think what you know, you can only know it, right? Because as the author says, knowing is static, it's silent, it's not doing anything. It's like thinking, inspiration touches knowing and pulls it through without all of the gyrations of the mind, right? It's like it's somehow, I don't know if that would be akin to like the spirit shuttle in the raw material, but you can touch into something that's unthinkable and then manifest it through you because it came from a place that's like very pure. And I agree with what Erin said too about how whenever we think and imagine, we're basically distorting or sort of like omitting some of what is true so that we can have that thought experiment, that experience. Because you can't think it all at once.
I really think you're onto something with the spirit shuttle. I really think that's a really fascinating point, and it rings true for me that like when we're talking about knowing and we're talking about inspiration, it feels like there's some communication happening through consciousness, through direct awareness it's not about mind at all. It's beyond the mind, it's beneath the mind. That feels true. So Walter Russell gets a lot more deeply into this later, but this whole idea of genius, I really appreciate what he says about genius. Like he basically says genius is a choice. It's not like there's only, 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000 people are genius. Genius just is when you sort of receive the gift from the creator that is your unique gift. And when you connect with like the essence that the creator wants to experience through you, and you can work with that, that's genius. It's just the choice to sort of like receive and express the gifts of the creator, and everyone's gifts are unique. And you can't be genius. It's something that's not your essence. It's not your your unique portion of God's one whole idea. But it's just a really empowering perspective that he shares, and I really appreciated it. And it connects to inspiration. It's like inspiration is sort of the language that our genius comes to us, or that comes through us, is being connected to inspiration.
There's some more contemporary author who talks about that in the same way. Is it Malcolm Gladwell, maybe? Somebody talks about like there used to be, like we would think of as someone as a genius, and instead we can think of their being genius, or even before we thought of people as a genius, we used to think of their being genius, and it kind of flip-flopped, like, oh, there is genius, and then someone is a genius, and then there is genius. Anyway, and I read something about like how that influenced inspiration in culture, and like when there's a cultural concept of like, for instance, if we think of Einstein as a genius, like how that actually becomes much more limiting, and it like limits the flow of the genius that can move through, versus when we think of it as, it's sort of like a muse. There's a muse that I'm connected to, and we don't take it personally. That sort of cultural way of understanding genius actually allows it to flow much more freely.
Yep. Isn't that Brene Brown or some author? I don't remember. Anyway, Diana, and then Cap.
Oh, did I interrupt somebody? I'm just so excited about this topic. And the more I think about it, it's like the idea of inspiration having to do with the spirit shuttle and being an indigo ray kind of activity. And Rod does use that word inspiration when it comes to what the indigo ray does. And I'm thinking about someone in my life who seems to be very metaphysically powerful and who has that quality of genius. And when he was young, he could, do you know what jetties are? Like these big rocky outcroppings that stick out into the ocean. Even when he was very little, he was really fast. He could do like a 4.5 minute mile, right? And he could sprint. You know how the jetties are like covered in moss and they're slippery and wet and craggy and you could fall to your death kind of thing. He could just turn off his brain and run full sprint down those jetties. And it just seemed impossible that he wouldn't kill himself that way. And I feel like there are people who do this. And I feel like there is that element of indigo ray involved, of inspiration, of faith, because you have to toss out your rational mind. So it's just powerful to think when you see people doing these incredible feats and you're like, wow, the body's capable of that. And it's like, well, we're capable of anything if we can get out of our own way. Just enjoyed making that connection in my head.
I just wanted to name some authors. The Hendricks, Gay and somebody, they wrote a book called The Big Leap, and they talk about the zone of competence and the zone of something else and the zone of genius. And so that feels like it's speaking to the same thing of like the choice to let yourself, kind of receive what is yours to be and radiate. And then Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a book called Big Magic, where she talks about the creative.
I think that's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah,
the
totally.
creative impulse will strike. And like, if you don't kind of choose to take it on, it'll go find somebody else. Because there's like, there's stuff in the field that's wanting to get expressed, and it'll kind of visit different people, which I think is also why, things emerge concurrently across space through multiple people at the same time. That's what I got.
Yep. Nice. Okay, let's read a little bit more. Let's just jump to chapter 4, Cosmic Consciousness. And maybe someone could just read the whole thing. It's just 2 pages.
I'll read it.
I'm happy to read again. Go ahead, Diana.
If I can see it. Cosmic consciousness. Beyond the genius is the mystic. The mystic is one who has attained consciousness by a complete severance of the seats of consciousness and sensation. He is then almost totally unaware of his body and is totally aware of the light of God centering him. Omniscience comes to him in that timeless, blinding flash of light, which is characteristic of complete severance. This experience was described in the illumination of St. Paul. Every timeless flash of intense inspiration which comes to any man is a partial illumination. For inspiration is the manner in which new knowledge comes to man from the cosmos. Of all mystics, Jesus was the outstanding example of all time. He was the only one in all history to have known complete cosmic conscious unity with God. The Bible refers to cosmic conscious experience as the illumination, or being in the light, or in the spirit. In all history, less than 40 cases of partial cosmic consciousness are known, and probably not more than 3 of these anywhere nearly approached the complete state of illumination experienced by the Nazarene. Cosmic consciousness is the ultimate goal of all mankind. All will know it before the long journey of man is finished. But here are many in this new age just dawning. There are many who are ready for it in part, if not fully. Many desire it fully, but it is best that it come bit by bit, for the complete severance is very dangerous. The ecstasy of this supreme experience is so great that one does not wish to come back. The power of severance of soul from body is within easy accomplishment, but to step back into the body is very difficult. The way to gradually attain cosmic consciousness is to intensify one's conscious awareness by much aloneness and companionship with God, while manifesting Him in every moment and in every task of life. Moment by moment, companionship with God brings with it so great a realization of oneness with Him, that the transformation into that full realization of unity is apt to take place at any time. The deterrent to cosmic consciousness is the feeling that God is far away instead of being within, and that we can reach that faraway God only through sources outside of ourselves.
Thank you. I'm no expert on historical figures who have attained cosmic consciousness, but I do have a little bit of a sense that neither is Walter Russell. I think there's more. I just have a sense that there's more going on in this activity, this cosmic consciousness activity, than he is aware of, and he's a bit biased towards Jesus the Christ, which is I don't disagree at all that his take on what Jesus experienced is true, but the piece about like that there's only been 40 and only 3 reached that level doesn't quite ring true for me. But it's also not very important. That part of it is not very important. BJ, you're a mystic. You're a mystic geek. You geek out on mystics and historical mystics. You got a lot of mystic fandom. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I bet you know 40 mystics. I bet you know of and have read about at least 40 mystics who've had some touch with cosmic consciousness.
Totally. Seems like it. I mean, I don't know their experience, but I've read a lot of writings of mystics who seem to make full contact. Yeah. I had a similar take. Like, wonder if that's his own particular bias. Like, I wonder how much came through his direct download, like how much came through direct knowing, and how much comes through his, his bias or his.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Any other thoughts about cosmic consciousness?
Well, I have thoughts. They're about cosmic consciousness, but just he hadn't read the raw material, so he didn't know that Jesus was only graduating from 4th density to 5th density. And yeah, maybe that's the only time that's happened, like in our human history on this planet. So that's legit. But also, it's like, I don't have to say this, but I kind of have to say it because it just keeps being so present for me. So Steph and Diana are the only ones that don't know about the system that I work with of understanding core energetic patterns that people run. And one of them is called the mystic. And mystics, it's really easy for them to go up and out. Like, that's kind of the preference. And it's only one of what I'm now learning there are 6 types. So, there's these like kind of 6 types of core energetic patterns. The mystic is only one, and it's easy for it to go up and out and leave the body. And there's like an innate desire to be in connection with cosmic consciousness. And the shadow of the mystic is spiritual superiority. So it's just been like, as soon as he started talking, as soon as he said the mystic, the genius and the mystic, when I was listening to you read it earlier, I was like, oh, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Totally.
So that's very alive for me in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And like how to translate. I mean, and also the gift of the mystics is that they are teachers. They're like here to like bring this information down in and through, so people who don't have that innate capacity can have access to it. But also, like, I don't know if the only way to have a connection with cosmic consciousness is by like the soul leaving the body. Like, what if we can have direct access to cosmic consciousness through the body? Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Thanks.
Yeah, Diana.
It's also interesting to me that he says man is the only unit in creation who has conscious awareness of the spirit within him and electrical awareness of duly conditioned light acting upon his senses. I can understand where if he's a teacher to humans, he might say something like that, because for humans who have not yet awakened to their spiritual nature, that's the context, that's all they know. But he'd be missing a huge part of the puzzle, according to Ra, if he thought that there weren't other entities on other planets in third density or in other densities who have access to this conscious awareness of the spirit, right? And yet here he's saying man's the only one who has it within him, which, like, if you're looking at planet Earth, second density animals, first density minerals, etc., maybe not yet, but that's definitely not the whole picture. Yep. According to our cosmology. So right. Either he was super limited in his perception, or he was narrowing like how he was communicating it, just so as not to overwhelm his audience, because that's all they can see and perceive.
Yeah. I translate when he says man, I translate that to mean mind, body, spirit complex.
Any living being. With an activated
mind, body, spirit complex.
So third density and above?
I mean, wouldn't you say that fourth density entities are also mind, body, spirit complexes?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. I mean, so that's interesting.
I mean, I think he's talking about not humans, not Earth humans, and not specifically third density humans necessarily. I'm not saying he has really clear awareness of the higher densities. He doesn't talk about it. He does talk about the octave, which is fascinating. But anyway, when I translate, when he uses the term man, I think he's talking about, where we're at in our evolutionary stage, like mind, body, spirit complex, rather than only third density humans. Just how I take it, but I might not have that correct either.
That sets things right for me.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
BJ. It is for me too. And I think this is an interesting moment in terms of our study. Like, I think for years, a lot of us have been studying Ra, and we have a lot of context. But at this point, Aaron, as far as I know, you're the only one who's like read ahead, like you have so much more broad context of what we're going to cover in terms of his cosmology and where he's coming from than a lot of us do. Like for me, I've only read up through chapter 6 so far. And it's an interesting moment to be sort of interpreting and taking everything with a grain of salt, like wondering, should I take it this way? Should I take it that way? And part of the filter that I put this through is that this seems like it was published in the 40s, and I imagine there's like the audience that he was speaking to, and I think he probably wasn't trying to speak beyond this planet, is the way that I guess. He was just like, here we are on this planet, but he didn't say that. So he just said, man. And I take it similarly, like this level of consciousness that is, seated within human. Yeah. So that resonates for me.
Yep. We'll get into this, but he talks about the evolution of planets and how planets themselves evolve. And in that evolution, they are able to host, different lessons as humans go through their evolution. And that's fascinating. He's got a different take on it than, it doesn't quite match Ra's take, because he says that Earth eventually will no longer be, once all of humanity wakes up and goes and attains cosmic consciousness, Earth will no longer be required to host life, and Earth will spin off further out and then Venus will spin into its orbit, and Venus will spin up and start hosting life. And I was just like, oh, that doesn't quite comport. So anyway, these little interesting details. But he definitely, I guess I'm saying that because he does have this, broader perspective of, there are planets, and there's life on many planets. Planets themselves evolve. We're in a much larger context than we tend to, acknowledge in our conventional view. So I appreciate that. I wanted to make a comment about cosmic consciousness. I think that means opening the gateway to intelligent infinity. Again, tying back to the law of one. Does that seem for anybody who knows what that means? Does that seem right?
It seems right in the sense, if I'm remembering what we just read correctly, he's saying that like you can do it sort of partially or temporarily. And I think there's a difference between obviously like blowing open the gateway so that you can walk the universe with unfettered tread, so to speak, and simply having momentary access to a whole bunch, right? Like
right.
Touching into intelligent infinity versus fully opening the gateway, which is like a major.
Right. Yeah, and when he talks about Jesus, and he says whether or not it's actually accurate, he says he was the only one in all history to have known complete cosmic conscious unity with God. Well, and again, that seems like making contact with intelligent infinity. Full direct contact with intelligent infinity, which is something, once again, like you said, Diana, it's something that can happen in a moment, but it also is something that can be, that's seventh density. That's a seventh density entity who's established in that. And all entities can gain access to it temporarily, just like you were saying.
Sorry, my cat is so aggressively snuggly right now. It's like really distracting. But yes,
That's really cute.
I hear you. And I wonder if the experience of opening the gateway as a third density entity would be very different from the experience of opening the gateway as a fourth density, fifth, sixth, etc. So, I don't know. Christ had a body, a third density body, that he had to interpret everything that he was able to know through, So maybe he was as good as it gets here in 3D.
I've heard that Jesus was basically like the supreme teacher of the fourth density lessons on Earth, or one of the supreme teachers, but that Buddha was a fifth density teacher. Buddha was all about wisdom, the lessons of wisdom.
Yeah, this whole time we've been talking about Jesus, I've been thinking, but wasn't Buddha on par or even, yeah. I hold Buddha to be one of Jesus's teachers, actually, from some of the materials I've read.
That was one of the things that came up for me when he said 40. I was like, oh, he doesn't know about all those Indian rishis.
Yeah, totally.
Doing that long before this white guy.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I got.
But if you're making contact, go ahead, Erin.
I was just going to ask if you all know, if you've heard of a figure called Nityananda. Scott Mandelker talks about him a lot, and talks about him as though he's like fully realized, like, whatever that would be, like fully seventh density, fully activated, fully open contact with intelligent infinity being. I'm like, who is this? Who is this character? It's another Indian sage, mystic, Nityananda. I haven't looked into it, but I was curious. Any other comments before we keep reading? I don't want to say anything. Okay. Chapter 5, creative expression. It's a short one, just a page and a half. Boots, you want to do it?
Yeah, you just have to know I might sneeze or something in the middle. Got a little thing going. Creative expression. Inspired man alone can create enduring things. To create, we must first conceive. To conceive, we must stop thinking and know. All sensing must cease. There is no power in thinking. Thinking but expresses the power which lies in knowing. We must project ourselves into the still light of knowing to commune with God. We must become one with God to conceive idea in order to produce the form of that idea. A concept must precede its manifestation in form. The culture of the entire race is given to it by the few inspired ones who know God in them. They alone know immortality. The art of a civilization long outlives the civilization. The pyramids of Egypt still speak of the creation of a race which is long gone from the face of the earth. The sculptural and architectural beauty of Greece still tell us of a type of creative genius which has never been excelled. The great in the arts are few. Quote, art alone endures, all else passes, end quote. Great art can be created only by working moment by moment with God as co-creator. When man and God thus work together, they commune one with the other as one person. The language of the communion is the language of light, which man calls inspiration. When man works alone, his works are as the winds which blow. When man works with God as co-creator, his works are forever enduring. Every great genius manifests this law, that he is one with the God mind, that God is him in the sort, that God in him is the source of every thought, and that he is inspired by that omniscience and omnipotence within him, which make his work enduring.
This makes me think of in sculpture and also in painting, people talk a lot about that the pinnacle of talent is to be able to express like a sense of livingness through the eyes. To either sculpt eyes or paint eyes in a way that there's a sense of, oh wow, there's something looking back at me. And of course, Walter Russell was both. He was a sculptor and a painter, and people said that about his work, that his works were masterly because, I mean, they were technically very well. You know, he was a very technically talented artist, but that he expressed the knowing of the soul, like the truth of the soul and the truth of the creator, and that we're spiritual beings. And you could witness that through his artwork. It's one of the things that comes to me when I read about this creative expression and creating with the knowledge of God or with God.
I actually kind of have the idea. I'm not stuck on it, but I kind of have the idea, like similar to what Natalie was saying about the sort of ego of the mystic, of saying like, you know, I'm able to do this and everyone should be able to do this or something. Like that's kind of how that's partly how I heard this this chapter, was like upholding some, you know, the creative expression that he found access to, and upholding it as this you know, sort of singular amazing thing. Anyway, so I was sort of just like hearing his ego through this, but I don't know if that's my own projection or filter or whatever. It was like, okay, yeah, you're pretty great, you know, you're great. But yeah.
Well, it makes me think of the statement earlier in the first, I think it was in the first chapter we read, where he talks about, maybe it was the last chapter, the deterrent to cosmic consciousness is the feeling that God is far away instead of being within, and that we can reach that faraway God only through sources outside of ourselves. I mean, that is talking about the world's religions. That is talking about the culture of this planet. Like, that is so like nailing like how, like the sort of soup that most of humanity is swimming through. Like the model of God that most people, as far as I understand, in our civilization are working with is that one. And I'm like, it makes me think, like, what would it be like to live in a planetary culture where everyone was, where it was the opposite. Like, what he's presenting was the sort of norm. And I wonder if like it wouldn't be true that everybody, could experience this creative expression that was masterful or genius. If there was anyway, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, VJ, but I also I don't it doesn't seem so far-fetched that if we all were encouraged from a young age to know that God was within us and to create consciously with that power, I can imagine a world full of geniuses, a world full of like just profound creativity.
Yeah, that really resonates for me too. And I'm fine with you, softening what I said before. I was just sharing it because it was there for me to share. And I also think there's like it's helpful to have a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
So I was just voicing some of the skepticism. But yeah, that really resonates for me too, in terms of like, yeah, if we all, and I can find it in myself too, when I am able, like I can find it or at least what's close to what you're expressing, like when I can allow dance and movement through my body to be a direct expression of or as closely as I'm able to find it, like expression of creator, like it's a completely different experience than if I think I'm the one dancing and moving my arms or like performing the steps. It's completely different. And the feedback or the like reception that I get is completely different too. Like it's a transmission versus oh, that was pretty or something like that. So yeah, that really resonates for me too.
Yeah.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, good evening. Sorry I'm late.
It is okay. It's nice to see you. Glad you were able to hop on for the end.
Yeah, we had a annual board meeting tonight that went late. But you're talking about dancing and experiencing the creator?
Yeah. Yeah, we just read chapter 5, creative expression, where he was talking about like creating directly with God is like a way of finding and expressing our genius. Maybe that's how I take it.
Well, coincidentally, in my Camelot journal entry today, dancing was talked about as a means of turning off the conscious mind so that you could experience the creator or your higher self or a greater level of reality than the conscious mind would have if you weren't working to find another mind, allow another mind to come through.
That's awesome. Jim, when do you get to dance? How do you like to dance?
I usually dance about half hour before I go to bed. And I like to do what I call improvisational dancing and listen to music that inspires me, the music and the words, and just let it go. And I don't really know where I'm going to go. I just go. And I really enjoy doing that.
That's awesome. That sounds wonderful. Natalie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I love knowing that about you, Jim. I like to dance too. Well, I just am thinking about all these artists, musicians through time that have said similar things to what this chapter is saying.
Mm-hmm.
Like they just open themselves up and they're just the vessel. They open themselves up. They have their talents and skills. And then it's like, and I really relate to it through dancing. That's probably where I experience it the most, dancing and sometimes doing energy work or medicine work with people. that I'll experience it that way too. But the flow state that like being in the pocket is what jazz musicians call it, where they're improvising and it's like working as a, as a group. I think that's so cool. But yeah, I just feel like it's funny, BJ, that this is where you had that come up for you, that kind of check of the shadow there. Because it didn't for me. I just relate it to I've just heard lots of artists and musicians over time talk about this phenomenon. Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's read the last chapter. We have 15 minutes. Chapter 6.
Yeah, let's get
knowledge.
to Diana's favorite part.
Jim, do you have a copy of the book or the reading?
I do, right here.
Would you like to read page 34?
Okay, we're chapter 6, you say?
Chapter 6.
Yes.
Okay. So, chapter 6, knowledge. Knowledge is cosmic. It belongs to the still light of the positive principle. It can never become a property of the two negations which constitute this mirage universe of matter in motion. To know all things means to have all knowledge of the whole one idea of the cosmos as cause. It does not mean knowledge of created things, which are effect of cause. The whole cosmic idea is simple. It can be known by anyone of average intelligence. Its bewildering complexities lie in the effect of cause. Man cannot know transient effect. He can know cause only. He can but comprehend effect. Man cannot know a sunset sky, for example, but he can comprehend it if he knows its cause. Knowledge is, therefore, limited to cause. All knowledge exists. All mankind can have it for the asking. It is within man, awaiting his awareness of its all presence. Knowledge cannot be acquired by the brain from without. It must be recollected from within the consciousness of self. Gradually, dawning conscious awareness is but gradual recollection of the all-knowing which has always been within man. Man cannot acquire knowledge from books or schools. He can but acquire information that way. But information is not knowledge until it is recognized by the spiritual consciousness of man, just as food is not nourishment for the body until it becomes a part of the bloodstream. Information gained by motion of the senses must be returned to the stillness of the source before it becomes knowledge. For the same reason, man cannot acquire knowledge from so-called facts of matter, for there are no facts of matter in a universe of transient matter in motion. All matter in motion is but a series of illusions which deceive man into drawing wrong conclusions. It is impossible for man to draw right conclusions from his observation of matter in motion until he has acquired the ability to translate dynamic effect back to cause. This he can do only through decentration to the one light of his conscious awareness of the source of all knowledge. Until he knows the why of effect and its deceptions, he has no knowledge whatsoever upon which he can rely. He has not but unreliable information. Information concerning the body, for example, does not give knowledge concerning cause of body or of the body's relationship to the universe. Information of birth and death of the body on the assumption that the body is self never can lead to knowledge that body is not self or that self is immortal. Nor can information concerning the material body alone, its chemistry and its functionings, heal the body. Bodies manifest life, but life is cosmic. Life is not in the body. Life is spirit, and spirit is still. Life is not chemistry or germ of matter. To heal the body so that it can manifest life of the spirit of the self of the body, one must give the unbalanced body the balance of the spirit. Knowledge of the light can alone do this. All the information in the world will not heal a body unassisted by the light in him who heals and in him who is being healed. Should I go ahead and read the rest, or somebody else want to read?
We've just been only reading the chapters. I'm leaving the in-between quotes to for folks
Okay.
to read on their own. Yeah, so curious just to hear any questions or thoughts about any of that.
I can say something.
Mm-hmm.
The part that Diana highlighted and put in the thread before, the second paragraph, to know all things means to have all knowledge of the whole one idea of the cosmos as cause. It does not mean knowledge of created things which are effective cause. The whole cosmic idea is simple. It can be known by anyone of average intelligence. Its bewildering complexities lie in effect of cause. And to me, what that brought up and what I put in the reply in the thread was there's this really helpful teaching from one of my favorite teachers lately. His name is Rupert Spira, and one of the things that he says is like a lot of times we think of enlightenment as this far off, unattainable or barely attainable thing, and the way that he talks about it is like enlightenment is really simple and really close at hand in everyone's experience. It's really just the direct knowing of the truth of who we are, which is that basically knowing versus thinking, like the knowing that we are, the presence of awareness that we are, like that's basically what enlightenment is. And the thing that it is more challenging is then living into that and then embodying that. And I find that to be a really helpful sort of flip, that like it's not this far off unattainable thing, it's very close, and then there's like an embodying of it. And yeah, that's what I want to say. I could say a lot more, but we only have a few minutes left and I want to hear from others too.
That reminds me of what Ross says, BJ, about how someone can be aware of the law of one without actually knowing that they are, right? But then there's all this work to do to evolve and bring that into to the light of consciousness and embody it. And the other thing that stuck out to me here was where the author said, information gained by motion of the senses must be returned to the stillness of the source before it becomes knowledge. And that rings of Ra's advice to use meditation, contemplation, and prayer to seat that which we have experienced down into the roots of the tree of mind, where it can be assimilated and like known. Yeah.
I want to say something else. There was this so fascinating conversation that I was part of the other day. Some of you all were part of it too, about AI. And there were people in the conversation who were talking about like thinking that AI could evolve and become conscious or something. And it just didn't make sense to me. It possibly they could, I don't know, I'm not claiming that I'm correct, but that exact thing was the difference to me. Like there were people who were talking about, well, if AI sort of have access to all of this information, why is it that they couldn't become conscious? And there's something that's so different to me about information and like receiving and knowing the information. There's like and sometimes I think of it as like the in breath of like I can read a whole chapter, but then there's like the out breath of like actually integrating it and knowing it and absorbing it. And it's a completely different thing to me.
Totally.
Yeah, and somewhere he talks about the creating universe, but at one point he mentions like creating beings. And I was questioning what could that mean? Is it being a co-creator? Is it being aware of your spiritual nature? Is it the difference between like something you think about like a crystal having a consciousness, an animal having a consciousness, and then there's these amalgamations of things that conscious beings have created, like a car, and it's made up of particles that have consciousness, but unto itself, like a car isn't necessarily a creating being. So when I think of AI, I think of how it may not be a creating being, but rather that which is created by creating beings.
Well, what got tricky in the conversation was that someone brought up, Jess, it might have been you actually, brought up like how Ra does say that places can become inspirited, right? And like, well, places are created things. And so then it kind of blew my mind. I'm like, well, maybe AI could become inspirited. Like, why, if a place can become inspirited, could, like, with so much human energy and maybe even love from some people going into this creation, like, what do I know? Maybe it's possible for AI to become conscious. Like, who knows? It was a fascinating conversation.
I
But
would
isn't
like,
anything that's not the creator, that wouldn't have the creator in it, that could become conscious?
I remember, and maybe Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, but I swear I remember reading in the raw material that there on some planets souls incarnate in robots. Like that's a thing that happens in our universe, as far as I remember reading. Did I make that up?
I don't remember that.
I had a feeling you didn't remember that, but it's like burned in my brain. Like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Ross says so. But maybe,
Well,
I mean,
they do
Well,
say
Ra
that
wouldn't
they've
have to say
traveled.
that. It could still be true.
Mhm. They said they've traveled to other galaxies, and what is it? It like staggers. I forget how they said it, but they said that it staggers the intuitive and intellectual capabilities just to even witness the life forms and the the way that the creator expresses in other galaxies. That's fascinating.
They do talk about remote controlled entities, right, Jim? I'm using the wrong words, but it had to do with, it was a conversation around Men in Black. It was talking about like
okay.
suits,
Yeah.
entities that are here that are being remotely controlled.
Right, by negative entities, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're still the creator.
Of course. So interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, to return to the knowledge chapter, the thing that sticks out to me again, one of the things that sticks out to me again is this idea, or the one whole idea. To know all things means to have all knowledge of the whole one idea, which is the original thought, which is Ra. I believe that's exactly what Ra calls the original thought, the one whole idea, and that it's simple. And, I've been in lots of conversations where people try to put a word to like, well, what is the original thought? What is the one whole idea? It's like, well, you can't really put words to it because it includes all words and everything. But love, love has been kind of like one of the concept complexes that stands in for like, for what that idea is. And I'm excited to get into Walter Russell's definition of love. It's pretty fascinating, and I think it does a good job of of standing in for this like original thought, the one whole idea. And Walter Russell calls it balanced love, balanced rhythmic, balanced interchange. And we'll unpack, as we get further, and we'll unpack what that means. It's a pretty interesting take on love and what love is. So yeah, any final thoughts or questions, comments?
I can share something that happened. Have you guys ever been to channeling sessions where someone will just channel something? So I went to a channeling session once, and my teacher was channeling this tree trunk people. It was very entertaining. It was like the entity was trying to get into her head, and it was like, the subject is too loose. What's going on with the body? It's like too loose. So that was like really interesting. I mean, that's like an entire rabbit hole. But this morning in the constellation I was in, we brought in someone to represent the dark forces that was in the person's lineage. And it came out as this like Bigfoot, like giant stomping person entity that was controlling the lineage. It was very interesting. Not to like throw another rabbit hole in here, but it was really entertaining how everything is just linked together. And I also love Jim's voice. So good. Thank you for reading.
Right? There's so much, that Blu-ray, there's so much energy like behind whenever you read something. It's like you're moving it all through you. I've always thought that.
One last thing is, I was thinking like that I love how it keeps coming back to stillness and prayer, and I wonder why that's the reason why so many people want to go into Vipassana retreats, and like so that they can be still and clear whatever is on their hearts, so that they can get really deep into themselves. So that's one of the things I was contemplating as we were reading through the stillness part.
Yeah, that's another thing that Walter Russell's teachings and Ra's teachings share, is the primary importance of meditation. Walter Russell also says that that's key. And it's interesting, we'll get into this later too, but Walter Russell also describes the process, and Jim, you read it in the final chapter, of decentration. Ra talks about concentration and then decentration. It's really interesting. Interesting to hear that.
I love this study. Thank you all. So
Yeah.
fun.
I'm really grateful y'all are along for the ride and interested. Yeah, it's a joy for me too. Well, thanks everyone. We've expired our time. It's 8:31, so we'll close the meeting and hopefully see you again next week, if not sooner.
Looking forward to it.
Yay.
Great.
Love you. Bye.
Love you all.
See you all. Bye-bye.
Thank
Love
you.
you all.